Welcome to the recorded version of How to Balance Work and At-Home Care, part of the Family Caregiver Support Webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Our presenter today is going to be Dr. Amy Dupree. Dr. Dupree, a gerontological social worker, is an internationally renowned expert on lifestyle issues relating to caregiving, retirement, aging, and family dynamics. Dr. Amy Dupree is president of Essential Conversations, Inc. and Dr. Amy, Inc., a company dedicated to family caregiver wellness. Dr. Dupree holds a PhD and master's in social work, specializing in gerontology, and earned her CSA, a designation for which she also trains others as part of their accreditation. Dr. Amy Dupree is a much sought-after speaker at corporate and professional events on the topics of caregiving, aging, and retirement, and she is also a frequent guest on radio and television. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to our presenter, Dr. Amy Dupree. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And as you said, today we're going to talk about the importance of work and in-home care balance. And this is such a crucial subject because so many of us are just struggling with work-life balance and trying to keep it all together and make sure everything's going okay. And then you add into that caregiving, and it becomes tough for a lot of folks because, you know, it's a huge role added into already a full life. So today we're going to talk about how can caregivers achieve balance. Without it, we know that they suffer personally, their work often suffers, and the quality of their caregiving can suffer as well. So that's why it's so important that as professionals, we find ways to support them. This topic of work-life balance in general has really become quite in vogue in the last 10 to 15 years, and I'm sure you, like me, have heard about it endlessly in TV, news, magazines. And if you look at what's happened that we're having to talk about this so much, it's things such as having now dual career families, having all this great technology that we both love and probably hate at the same time because it keeps us on call 24/7. It also means that we have more obligations and really more interruptions in our life. So we never have the downtime we used to have unless we really create that. And we know without that, what happens is people start to feel more and more stressed. And again, if you add in the stress of being a family caregiver, I think we can see how it's easy for a family to have their lives get totally turned upside down. You know, the Institute for Aging at the University of Pittsburgh says that when people start to need caregiving, someone in their family needs caregiving, what we know is the whole family starts to experience some financial pressure as well. And so what happens then, this contributes to the balance getting off because caregivers feel like they need to work more to help deal with the financial issues, but then they also feel like they need to work less because they have to deal with the caregiving issue. So it's balancing this idea of how do I work more so I have job security, I have the money I need, and hopefully maybe even get an advancement in my career, and how do I not work so much that I'm not there for my family. Caring for a loved one, especially if it's a spouse or an older parent, often really adds a conflict about the caregiver's ability to then work as well. Because the caregiver may need to take time off from work, sometimes without pay. That, of course, adds to their stress level, which we know as people's stress levels go up, that can increase their likelihood of getting sick, which can, of course, increase their stress level even more. Now, the truth is, and I think this is I'm kind of talking all the gloom and doom right now, what we really need to stress as professionals and reinforce with family caregivers is even though they may not believe it, they really can learn how to balance work and in-home care. So let's talk specifically about what we're going to discuss today. We're going to begin by talking about what work-life balance is and what the factors are that can tip it out of balance. And then we're going to discuss some tools that you can share with both your older clients and their family caregivers on how the family caregivers can ease their duties, have more time to bring to their work life, and also just more time to bring to the rest of their life. And then I'm going to provide you with suggestions that you can give to the caregiver on ways that they can really take care of themselves and not just give lip service to that, but actually do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by talking about what work-life balance does mean and doesn't mean. And Steve, if you can flip that next slide, we'll take a look at that. So first of all, as you're probably aware, it doesn't mean obviously spending an equal amount of time at work and then an equal amount of time caregiving. That's not what we're talking about, because we know that what we have to have is flexibility. Life isn't that neat and clean. So we need to be able to respond and help our caregivers respond to schedule changes, to things happening, and it can be challenges or it could be just happy events that they need to be able to adapt to. What we know is that for most people, this idea of work-life balance can and will vary over their lifetime. For example, when someone gets a new job or if they have a baby, this can swing priorities in one direction. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we get confused when we talk about work-life balance in thinking that this needs to be a day-to-day thing. And I love this idea that if you think about your life like a book with many chapters, in any one chapter, it's likely that you're focused on something. So for the examples I just gave, a new job or a baby, when we're in school, it's that. And when we're caring for an aging relative, it's that is our focus in that chapter. But if you look at your life as a whole, at the whole book, over time our lives are balanced. We don't caregive forever. We don't have babies around forever. We're not starting projects forever. So helping families understand that, yes, it may be intense during this time, but what I always say is caregiving is a finite thing. We don't know how long it'll go on, but we know that at some point it does end. So we want to help people feel a sense of overall balance, but without creating an expectation that they're going to have balance every single day of their life, because we know that just doesn't happen. Now, we know that work-life balance often gets out of whack when there are prolonged stressors on one or the other sides of that, the work or the home life. So again, caring for an aging parent over a long period of time can really add to that stress. The added duties really can prevent someone from not doing most of what they need to do or not doing any of it well, which also creates more stress when we're feeling like we're never getting it done or doing it the way it should be done. So a lot of folks say, how did life and work change so much? And we hear people often yearn for simpler times. What would make this better? And I think there's a reality that times aren't going to go back. And from a workplace perspective, if we look at the global marketplace, we look at internet commerce, that's really blurred the lines of when our work days begin and when they end. So instead of having a neat 8-hour work day, now we know that literally it can go on 24 hours a day. And if you look at the advanced communication technologies, things like smartphones, laptops, tablets, that means that people really are on call to work at most hours of the day. And as we know, many people are really forced to have to do that because of the nature of their jobs. Add to that we still have a tough economy, and many people are concerned about losing their jobs, so they're responding to employers' needs and requests to work longer and longer hours, and that can create more of a problem, an imbalance. Now, trying to manage all of those things we're talking about and balance it with childcare, social and community obligations, other family issues that might come up, and then add the duties of caregiving for an aging parent, and we can see how people really do get into the situation of feeling like they have no work-life balance. So let's talk about what the symptoms are of an out-of-whack work-life balance, because this can really help us in working with caregivers. So you see there on the screen several of these symptoms. One of the first things a caregiver may notice is being overtired or fatigued. Now, we have a lot of folks today who are suffering from this issue of feeling chronically exhausted. So it's hard sometimes to separate out which of this is caused by the added stress of caregiving and which of this is just that people have kind of adapted to feeling this way all the time. There's some real issues, though, with this feeling overtired and fatigued that a lot of folks don't realize. I'm sure you've experienced this as I have, that when you're really exhausted, it's just hard to think clearly. And it also means that hand-eye coordination decreases, which can have safety implications. So we know that people who have jobs where they depend on their ability to be physically present, not just mentally present, can possibly end up in situations where they're having accidents or there's an injury or they have to redo the work. So these things are really important, that being tired isn't just, gee, I don't really feel that great today. It means they're more at risk of having a car accident or an accident on the job, or that they're mentally not there. So that's one of the key things. Now you see the second one there is about missing important events. When it comes to family, we know it's important for most people to be there for the important events. things like their child's milestones or important birthdays or family gatherings. And if caregivers are missing out on these all the time, that's a sign that their life is out of whack. And obviously that can really harm the relationships that they have with their loved ones when they're not there. It can also impact someone's friendships. You know, we know that having good social support is key for many things in life. It is key as a caregiver to have great social support. And I think recognizing that when life gets out of whack, one of the things people often do is neglect their friendships because they think, I'll get back to that when there's time. But those friendships are very nurturing. So it's really important for us to encourage caregivers to continue to nurture that. And that means having to devote some time to friends. We also know that another issue is when you're really good at what you do at work, often it means you end up getting more work. You know, you may have heard the expression, the reward for good work is more work. Well, that's true for a lot of people. So if a family caregiver is regularly working extra hours and they end up getting more responsibility, this can create a never-ending and increasing cycle of additional work, and that obviously causes more concerns, more challenges, both at work and at home. So let's talk about how I help them create a care team. When I first heard this figure, I thought it was very revealing because what we know is from a national survey conducted by the Home Instead Senior Care Network, 72% of adults who are currently providing care for an aging loved one do it without any outside help, 72%. And I wasn't surprised by the figure, having worked in the field a long time, but I thought it was really an important thing for us to be aware of as we're working with families, that so few people really, really know how to get the help that they need to care for their aging parent. So we know that to avoid burnout and stress, this is not a job that can be done well alone. Most people need help. And so caregivers need to enlist the help of other family members, friends, or consider hiring a professional non-medical caregiver for assistance. So what we need to do is to help our clients ask for the help they need. And often people have a hard time with this. So I want to share with you a few surefire ways that they can use to enlist support. The first one, and you see this listed here, is a caregiver should make sure that everybody in the family has a responsibility. Now, it says there, give every person a responsibility. We don't mean that the caregiver should do that, but that everyone should have a responsibility. So let me give you an example. If the aging parent lives with the family caregiver, the main family caregiver, and so they're responsible for groceries and for meals, then another family member can be responsible for the medical aspects of care. So they could be the ones who make the doctor's appointments, who take their parent to an appointment. They can be the one who stays on top of the prescriptions and all of those sort of issues. They're managing the medical side of things. And then another person in the family can be the one who manages the social activities for the parents. So this means that perhaps this person will make sure that the parent still is getting together with friends, or if they go to church or synagogue, that they're getting there during their, on the appropriate day. So whatever is related to the person's social life. This is really key. So if the person, one of the siblings, lives 1,000 miles away, they're not off the hook. Then they can take responsibility for visiting a week a year to allow the caregiver who's living with the parents to go on their own family vacation. I think the key here is to look at all of the things that need to be done and then to make sure that everyone in the family has some responsibility, whatever that is. That is the thing that's likely to keep the family from both getting into conflict and to keep the main caregiver from falling apart. Now, whatever this agreement is that the family members come up with, the family caregiver should make sure that they're talking with other family members about their parent, about what's going on with their health, how much time the caregiver is spending caring for them. They want to make sure that all the family members are kept up to date. The reason that is that oftentimes the main caregiver doesn't think to share a lot of the information. And I always say they're kind of the keeper of the information. And then they're surprised when other family members aren't jumping in to volunteer to help. But the truth is that most of the time family members don't do that because they think everything's going fine. Why should they get involved? And if the family caregiver that is living with or most responsible for the aging parent would share more information more frequently, and this doesn't have to be burdensome. It could be sending out one email to all the family members once a week or once every couple weeks and giving updates about what's happening. They are more likely to be able to then enlist help because people will get that they do need that help. If family and friends are helping out with caregiving duties, the family caregiver also needs to remember, the main family caregiver, because really I think everyone in the family is family caregivers, but the main one needs to remember to be flexible. There's more than one way to care for someone, and everyone has a different approach. And this is your bullet point about be flexible, don't sweat the small stuff. And I would maybe say don't try to control everything in the world. And this is often where family members get into trouble, is that they think their sibling didn't do it well enough. And it's true, it may not be the same as what they would have done, but unless the person is in some danger, it's okay that it's done differently. Okay, so we're talking about letting go of the little things. One way for family caregivers to find more balance is to rethink some of their standards. For example, if the bed's left unmade or there's dirty dishes in the sink, it's probably really not going to impact the quality of life. The family caregiver should do what needs to be done and let the rest go. A lot of times people are very bad judges about this. I know we could say this doesn't have to be a caregiver. Probably many of us on this call are not a good judge about when enough is enough. And it really is okay to let things go that aren't going to cause a major negative consequence. It may not be the ideal that we want to live with, but that's okay. People, in the midst of caregiving and working and having family obligations, sometimes recognizing that creating less stress is better than having your bed made. Another way to find time is for the family caregiver to track everything they do for 1 week. They want to include their work-related activities, their non-work-related activities. Then they can decide what's necessary, what satisfies them the most, and they also can figure out what to cut or delegate, things they don't enjoy or they don't have time for. I know a colleague who says, just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I should have to do it, and it may not be mine to do. This is one of the greatest ways I think we can support families, is really helping them figure out how to effectively let go of responsibilities, how to bring in a care team, how to make sure that they're asking for help. This is the thing that, in my experience, people often do the least well when they're caregiving, and then they end up exhausted. Another way for a family caregiver to achieve more balance is to take a break, to get respite care. A lot of families do not know what respite care is, and so you may need to explain to them how respite care works, that it's short-term, temporary care provided to someone who needs assistance so the family caregiver can take a break from the daily routine and challenges of caring for an aging adult. Respite services may involve overnight care for an extended period of time. It could be just a few hours per day. Respite is often called, and I love this term, the gift of time. And if you ask caregivers what they need, they often need the gift of time. So this is something as professionals we could really, really do well, is to encourage people to take the respite care. And it could be formal respite care, or it could be informal respite care. When I say formal versus informal, I mean I used to provide respite care to my father when he was caring for my mom, and she required total care, could not be left alone after having a stroke, and he needed to get away a week or two a year. And I would go up and provide respite care and live at the house so that he could go. Now, that's informal, obviously, respite care, or people can hire for respite care. Another way to provide some balance is to contract for some in-home care services for the older parent. Those professional caregivers are trained especially in serving the needs of the older adult population, and they really can give family caregivers a much-needed break. They can provide services including companionship, home safety monitoring, house cleaning, meal preparation, personal care, and non-medical transportation to do things like run errands or go shopping. So making sure that families know about those services, understand how they work, and encouraging families to take advantage of that, I think, is key. A lot of times, especially spousal caregivers, will feel that they have to do everything. And one of the things that I often say is, it's not about doing everything. It's about making sure that the person you love gets the best care possible. but that doesn't mean you have to provide all that care. And I think that's key for us to communicate to families. Creating a care team that includes both family and outside help really can go a long, long way towards maintaining a work-life balance, and it's something we really need to encourage caregivers to do. Okay, so let's take a look now at some employer programs. First, let's talk about the Family Medical Leave Act. This program is managed by the U.S. Department of Labor, and it's designed to help employees balance their work and family responsibilities by allowing them to take off reasonable unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons. So if the family caregiver that you're dealing with works for a public agency, any public or private elementary or secondary schools, or a company with 50 or more employees, they may be entitled to up to 12 weeks of unpaid, job-protected, and that's key, leave per year, including leave to care for an immediate family member with a serious health condition. Other stipulations are that the employee must have worked for their employer for at least 12 months, and they had to have worked at least 1,250 hours. The Family Medical Leave Act also requires that the employee's group health benefits be maintained during their leave. So again, let your client's caregiver know that they should visit their employer's human resources office, determine if they're eligible for this kind of a program. Many people don't know about it and don't know to take advantage of it. Another employee-sponsored program you can recommend they check into is an EAP program or Employee Assistance Program. As you may know, employee assistance programs are offered by many employers, typically in conjunction with a health insurance plan. Now, EAPs are intended to help employees deal with personal problems, such as caring for aging parents, that may adversely impact their work performance or their health or their well-being. EAP counselors typically provide assessment, support, and then if the person needs it, they refer them to additional resources. The EAP services are usually free and confidentiality is maintained so people don't have to worry about losing their jobs because they go to see the EAP. Many employers are now recognizing the importance of EAP services for people who are caregiving, and we know that those services can be very, very beneficial in finding some help to ease the caregiving stress. Now, other than time off and assistance programs, there's other ways that your client can work with their employer to create more balance between their work and their caregiving needs. And that really is about alternative work schedules. So let's talk about what some of these alternative work schedules are. Instead of going into the office every day, some employers will allow employees to telecommute. Basically, as we know, telecommuting means you work from home or some other remote location. For instance, the family caregiver could set up shop with a laptop and a cell phone from their older parent's kitchen and still work while also attending to caregiving needs. That is more feasible now than it was 20 or more years ago. Obviously, it gets easier with this is one of the good parts of the technology. Another alternative work option is job sharing. Job sharing is when two people share the same position in a company, with each working a part of the week. So this means that two or more people share a single full-time job. So this opens up flexibility, it opens up freedom, and it also means that the person has job security and often is doing something they really love and that they're good at. That's why they're allowed to do this. It also means that they're able to keep their benefits and salary on a prorated basis. It can be a very, very effective strategy, and a lot of times people just don't think to put this one in place. Another thing that people can do is work what we call a compressed work week. This is really allowing to get usually 1 day a week off. So typically we think of someone working 40 hours in fewer than 5 days, so perhaps 10 hours, 4 days a week. There's another arrangement that some people use, though, which is called the 5-4-9. That's a week of 5 9-hour days followed by a week of 4 9-hour days. And they rotate that 5 9-hour days followed by 4 9-hour days. And that gives your client a day off every other week. So for an employer who's saying, I'm not sure we can swing not having you in the office a day a week, they may be more open to a day every other week. The last program I want to mention to you is called shared leave. This is different from alternative work schedules or employer-sponsored programs, and we're really starting to see this grow in popularity, especially if you look at the health sector or the government or nonprofit sectors. basically what a shared leave program is, it allows an employee to receive donations of either annual leave or sick leave or personal holiday hours from other employees. So oftentimes in big corporations, it gets thrown into a pool where people can use this if they perhaps have a prolonged illness or a family member with a prolonged illness that could lead to possible loss of income. So a common situation where this gets used is caring for an aging parent. Again, they should go check this out with the HR department. Is it available? If it's not available, they can look into, could they start a shared leave program? Is there some openness to this idea? Again, these ideas are catching on more all the time, partly because we recognize the fact that more and more families are dealing with these issues. Now, obviously, there's some good options for creating a balance between a family's work and their caregiving needs when we look at it from the work standpoint. However, we still need to talk about making sure that we encourage the family caregiver to take care of him or herself, because even if people get the time off, if they don't take care of themselves, it doesn't really matter. So let's take a look at self-care for caregivers. There's probably nothing on this list that's very shocking to you, but here's the thing. If you ask most people, are they doing these things, I think that we'd find out that many, many people are not. So I'd like to spend a fair amount of time on these because I think we need to talk about how do we really help caregivers do this well and not just pay lip service to this. You know, a lot of times caregivers say, with everything else I have going on in my life, there's absolutely no way that I can take time for myself. It's not that I don't want to, I just don't have the time ability to do it. Well, the truth is, we know that people have to take care of themselves, or we have very good research that shows they often burn out and end up needing care of themselves. So I think the goal here is to get people in a prevention mode rather than getting them into the mode of reactivity. And, you know, as I say to people frequently now who say to me, I can't take a break, I always say, would you expect your cell phone to work endlessly without plugging it in and recharging it? And they say, of course not. And I say, why could you possibly have that understanding for a cell phone but think that you can go on endlessly without plugging back in? And, of course, many of us will cite the thing that they say on airplanes when they say make sure they put that you put your own mask on first before helping someone else. And we have to get people to see that this is not selfishness. It's not self-centeredness. It's a necessary part of caregiving if we're actually going to be able to go the long haul as a caregiver. So taking care of yourself. We know that it means eating right, getting enough rest, building exercise, keeping up your own medical appointments. Let's break those down a little bit more. So when we talk about working out, we're really talking about exercising. And, you know, there's 3 types of exercise that we should encourage people to do. There is cardiovascular or aerobic exercise. There's strength-building exercises, weightlifting, also yoga or Pilates or something like that. And then there's stretching. And there's a lot of figures now being tossed around about sort of what's the minimum that people need to give to do that's healthy. The truth is, if somebody isn't exercising at all, anything they do is going to be a fabulous improvement. So we should just encourage that. And we should encourage them to do something they like to do. If it's walking, if it's dancing or bicycling, running, swimming, whatever it is. And we really should encourage them to do it for a minimum of 20 minutes at least 3 times per week. I read an article last week that many of you may have seen. It was in one of the papers as I was traveling that talked about the fact that really what we need is 30 minutes 5 times a week or 150 hours 150 minutes of exercise a week. If you exercise 150 hours a week, you only have 18 hours left in the rest of your week, so that wouldn't be good. But 150 minutes in a week was what this article said, and said that that's really going to become the new fitness standard. However, again, I think what we have to do with caregivers who are not exercising or anyone not exercising is say, could you start out doing 20 minutes 3 times a week? And then helping them figure out how to make sure they actually can track that, see that they're hitting their goals, and get the satisfaction of recognizing that they feel better and that they can continue to expand in this area. A second thing you see on the list is meditate. This can vary in the type of meditation people do, but we know caregivers can sit still and breathe deeply with their mind as quiet as possible whenever they think that things are moving too quickly or they're feeling overwhelmed by the caregiving responsibilities. Many times they may feel like they don't have a minute to themselves, and that's the time they need to walk away and take that minute. Now, we know that there's lots of ways to meditate effectively, and if you Google meditation or encourage your client to Google meditation, you will get lots and lots of resources on it. And again, the research is very strong on meditation and its ability to alleviate stress and prevent a lot of medical problems as well. The third thing that you see on the list is asking for help. As we said here, 72% of adults don't do it. They do it all alone. So we've got to get them thinking about asking for help. And, I talk about this subject a lot because I think it's so important for people to ask for help. And I think people don't do it very well. And one of the techniques that I suggest is to write down everything that you do in a course of a day or a week, as we said, to keep track of it, and then to write down a list of people that could potentially help. Because we tend to get stuck on just a couple of people, and caregivers really need support in figuring out that there are more people in their lives than just their sister and their brother. And one of the ways, again, to do that is to write down not just the caregiving responsibilities, because that's what we tend to think, I can only ask someone to help do one of the caregiving things. No, perhaps it's writing down grocery shopping, and you just need somebody to help you make sure there's food in your house. And if that's the case, it's legitimate to have a caregiver put that on the list, and then if someone is helping with that, they have more time for the caregiving. So I always say to people, write down anything that takes you more than 15 minutes. And I say 15 minutes. I say, well, if you have 4 things that take 15 minutes, that's an hour. That's a lot of time. So we have to get people to be more creative when they think of this, and don't just write down, this is a caregiving responsibility. What are all the life responsibilities? The next thing, again, is taking a break, the key there, right? And so they've got to make arrangements for any necessary fill-in help. And again, they have to be creative. And creativity is the key in this, and I think we have to help them do that because a lot of people in their own lives can't see a way to be creative. So perhaps there are family members they haven't tapped. And this could be young family members. If the person just needs companionship, isn't safe alone, they could have an older teenager helping out if it were a safe situation, or someone in there who's home for the summer from college. Whatever the situation is, I think a lot of times we get limited to, I only have these couple of people within my family. Now, outside of family, turning to friends is not a bad idea either. A lot of times we hesitate to ask people in our lives because we feel like everybody's so burdened. The truth is, most people want to be helpful, but they don't know how to. And I think all of this is a two-way street. So they may be helping you right now, but you may end up helping them if their parent needs help or someone else in their family needs help. People don't have to, when we're talking about getting help or taking a break, they don't have to take off a week at a time. Even if they could take a single day off, for many people, they haven't had a single day off in so long, they can't even remember what they like to do, which is another exercise you can do with people as they're looking at taking a break, is ask them, what are some of the things you would love to do if you had time off? And you may find people who've been caregiving for a while can't think of anything. They've gotten too deep into the caregiving to remember what they liked that was separate from that. So there's an opportunity to get folks to write down all the things that they love to do, or if they can't remember now, that they used to love to do. Is it reading a book? Is it going out somewhere? Is it meeting a friend for coffee? Is there a TV show? So again, all those things should be written down, and they should keep that near them so that when they do actually take a break, they then know what they have a list of things to remind them, this is the stuff that I want to do. Again, they need to make sure, though, they have backup care in place, or they're just going to spend the entire time worrying, and that's obviously not the goal. We also have to encourage them, though, when they're away, they're really away. It's not about checking in constantly, about coming back home. So a lot of times people have trouble letting go, and I think what we can do is just say, make one phone call a day or one check-in, and then know that if somebody needs you, that they will call you as well. So staying away is an important part of taking a break. Another way for caregivers to ease their stress is to make sure they're eating well. And this is something that people often let go when they're under a lot of stress, and then that adds to their stress. So suggesting that they eat lots of fruits, vegetables, protein, including nuts and beans, whole grains. We know that indulging in a lot of caffeine and fast food and sugar as quick pick-me-ups also produce just as quick a let-me-down. So I think we have to encourage people to really think about, is their diet part of their problem? The caregiver also needs to take care of their own health. And there's lots of studies now that show, especially with spousal caregivers, they often neglect their own health. So as professionals, we can make a real push to say to people, are you getting your medical appointments? Are you making sure that you're taking care of your checkups, that you're not ignoring symptoms that you have? They want to make sure that just because they're caregiving, they're not spending all their time at the doctor's just with their loved one. I love the next one that says indulge. This is a hard one for caregivers because they start to feel like they're not supposed to have fun when they're caregiving. So I think this is something that as they're making their list of things they like to do, they can include some indulgences. It might be a foot massage or a manicure. They could go out for a nice dinner, a concert. They could take themselves away for a night or two, whatever that feels good to them, so they can reward the wonderful care that they're providing to their aging parent. There is no need for them to feel guilty about wanting to feel good. And if they're expressing guilt around that, we need to help them to talk with someone to help them get through that. And one place they can do that is to get support through a local caregiver support group. Those folks understand that what they're feeling as caregivers is typical, and that they can help them get through the guilt, the stress, and they can offer very practical solutions. I think people getting into caregiver support groups is a great idea. It has such a benefit to everyone in the group to hear that I'm not the only one, and that I know that there are solutions to this. And, there are caregiver support groups in almost every community, and one of the great things now is there are also online caregiver support groups. In the end, I think we can also just encourage caregivers to make sure they maintain their sense of humor, to know that it's okay to say no to another responsibility, and to really encourage them not to feel guilty for taking time for themselves. If they don't watch their health and well-being and recognize that it's of the utmost importance, they're not going to be able to go the long run with their family member. I talk to people a lot about the idea of thinking about caregiving as a marathon, not a sprint. And you need very different skills for a marathon than you do for a sprint. And a lot of people use crisis behavior in the beginning of caregiving, and they mobilize all of their resources and their time to put into caring for their loved one. And that's appropriate in a crisis, but we can't maintain crisis behavior for the long haul. And that's why we need to get people to switch into sustainable behavior. What really is sustainable behavior so that they can go the long run? And I think when people think about it from that standpoint, about am I living right now in a way that's sustainable for the long haul? Most caregivers that I interact with would say no. We need to help them figure out what is a sustainable way to go for them. And I think when they understand that taking care of themselves will also allow them to be there for their aging parent or aging spouse, they're sometimes more willing to do it because that's important than for their own self-care. And I saw this when my father was caring for my mother. My dad had smoked for most of his life since he'd been a young man, and he had tried to stop smoking a number of times and was not successful. And when he was a caregiver for my mother, he quit smoking at the age of 77. And one of his concerns was that he was developing some health problems related to the smoking, and he wanted to make sure that he would be there to take care of her. That's a perfect example of what I mean. If people will often make changes for the person they're caring for when they don't do it for themselves. Okay, so now let's talk about some resources. You see there on the first bullet point, caregiverstress.com. There is a video on that site about how to balance work and at-home care, and that might be an excellent resource for your caregiving clients. In addition to that, you might want to suggest they look at some local resources. Obviously, you want to make suggestions about caregiver support groups, and although this is not on there, you could call the Alzheimer's Association about caregiver support groups. You could refer to the Area Agency on Aging that's listed there. They will know about caregiver support groups. Often faith communities and schools know about things going on. So I think, again, exploring all opportunities. Schools often are a fabulous source of volunteers to help older adults and family caregivers with some easy tasks around the house, for example, yard work. I know that many high schools now are requiring students to complete some volunteer hours in order to graduate. And I have a friend who, when she was caregiving for her husband, had those students taking care of her yard for a number of years while she was intensely caregiving. And she said it was such a gift to her because she didn't have to worry about all of the yard work. So I think thinking about what's going on in your local community, what's available, making sure that as a professional you know about it so you can pass it on to clients so that when they're caregiving, they don't have to be searching out these sort of opportunities. When they're very stressed and managing multiple roles, it's often really hard for them to find these resources on their own. And by just giving them this information, it can be like a lifeline to them. Okay, so now let's take a look at where we go from here. So one of the things that you can do is step back and say, which of my clients are starting to show the stress? When you look at this, what are you seeing from people? Are you having a lot of clients that are having the symptoms we talked about early on? I think the earlier we intervene and have conversations about self-care and how to balance work and at-home care, the better we can, the more likely we are to be successful with our clients. So I think catching people before they get into crisis is really the goal. Prevention or catching early stages. And then I think asking what tips do you need to share with those clients so they can get to that work-life balance? What resources do you need to share? And then finally, what is it that you need to do after this webinar to apply this information? Are there people that perhaps you haven't thought about, or do you maybe need to step back and make sure that you explore some more resources so that you have them at your fingertips when clients need them? Okay, so that is the end of this portion of the webinar. I'm now going to stop, turn the phone back to Steve, and let him open up the phone lines for questions. Steve?
Great. Thanks a lot, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of great information for our caregivers and their professionals, helping them out. And if you are ready, let's jump right into the Q&A portion. I would also like to take a moment here to welcome Mary Alexander from Home Instead Senior Care to the Q&A portion of today's webinar. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so let's jump right into it here. The first question. I have a client whose daughter struggles with work-life balance very badly. It's very hard to watch her struggle and suffer from the imbalance in her life. It's also hard to see her relationship suffer with her father. How can I help her without offending her?
You know, I think Dr. Amy and I will kind of attack this from two different perspectives. You know, first of all, I think the important part is that she has to first realize there's a problem. I mean, and having some real open, honest conversations with her might be the place to start. Showing her some real life examples of what you see. You know, I noticed you were doing this. I can see you're really stressed out when this happens. I mean, if you can start to open up the dialogue, she may not be in a position yet to hear it. I mean, sometimes I know when we were dealing with my parents' aging issues, I had one sibling that just simply wasn't ready, wasn't on the same page as the rest of us, and really took her a long time to get to where we were, and you watched her struggle, and it really hurt to watch your sibling do that. So we ended up kind of having an intervention of some sort, just saying, okay, this is what's going on, and we love you enough to bring it to your attention. We want to help you, but you got to let us in. So, I mean, it's really just letting them know that they're not alone and to give them some real-life examples. Dr. Amy?
I think I love what you said. I think people often aren't very aware because, this may not be a nice analogy, but I think it works very well. There's a thing about what happens if you put a frog in a pan of cold water and then just put the heat up, that you actually cook the frog before the frog jumps out, because the frog keeps adapting to the temperature of the water. And that's what caregivers do. They take on more and more responsibility, and they often aren't even aware they're doing it. So it's a gradual thing. A lot of times people have the immediate crisis, but then once they adapt, as they're in this caregiving long term, they don't recognize that they've gotten in the situation they're in. So I love the idea, Mary, where you talk about sitting down and saying, this is the things I'm noticing, and being very specific on the behavioral things and expressing some concern. And I also think anything you can do to help somebody problem solve this is really key. So here, let's talk about what we could do to make this better. So I agreed with everything Mary said.
Okay, we've had a couple questions asking about the online caregiver support groups. Are there any of those organizations that you can recommend?
Steve, I don't have those websites available. I don't know them offhand. I'd have to look them up. They're often posted. We've posted them on caregiverstress.com before, and I think we can get those if you want to send those out to people.
Yeah, that would be great. We can
Okay. Yeah, and I do know there are a few of them.
Okay. Next question. Do you have any suggestions for families who can't afford non-medical care and have limited extended family?
I think that's really where the community comes in to help. I think that the challenge is that there are so many programs for people that are economically challenged, and they don't have the resources to do private pay care. And it's amazing what's out there, but you have to do the research. It seems that, if you have a computer and a couple of hours, just sit down and start digging in. If that person is a veteran or the spouse of a veteran, there are dollars with the Veterans Administration. It's called aid and attendance. If you go to your local area office on aging, you may qualify for financially subsidized care. I mean, there's a lot of information and a lot of different programs. If you have a chronic condition, let's say it's MS or Parkinson's or something like that, sometimes they have respite care resource dollars available. So you become an investigator, and you really have to go out and investigate what's available in your market or in your community.
I love those ideas, Mary, and I would just add to them, again, the informal things as well. If you've heard me say this story again, because I repeat this story a lot because this woman did such a great job of utilizing the informal supports in her community. So the person I referred to earlier who had the school volunteers who did her yard work, she also was just really creative about calling every community group she could think about, the churches, talking about her situation, and her friends set up meals for her. One person coordinated and had a whole list of people who delivered dinners, and they did this for a year, had dinners for her, but no person on that list did it very much. And my friend who was receiving those meals did none of the coordination. She asked, because people kept saying to her, what could I do to help? And what she did was start mobilizing this and realized that people really did want to help. So I think learning to ask for help from the informal support network, in addition to what Mary said, it's using all of those resources. People really can get help even if they don't have money, but it takes creativity and it takes time, and often people don't think of some of these things. So the more suggestions that as professionals we can give them, the better.
Okay. Here's a really pertinent question. The question is, as a caregiver, how do you really begin to self-care? It's easier said than done. Can you talk a little bit more about how you actually begin that process, slow down, stop, and begin that process?
I'll take it from just a very personal experience I had. It really is hard to start the process. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm in the business, and as my dad was very, very ill, I mean, it's very hard to do the balance. But with some great advice, I really just sat down one day and I wrote down all of the things that had to get done, not only just in my work life, in my home life, but then also what I really needed to do to make sure that my father was cared for. And I realized as I looked at this daunting list, I didn't have to do it all. Like, I thought I did, and I thought I'd be less of a daughter if I didn't. And so really just start putting it down on paper and really understanding what is critical, what is non-critical, what are things I just like to have done or do, and who can help me. And as I started to put this list together, I realized I have a cousin who could do this. I have a friend that wants to do this. My work, when you talk about, what things your work can do, they helped with some things. And so it's just, it just becomes manageable if you write it down and have a plan. Attack it like you're attacking anything else, with a clear-cut plan, action steps, timelines, and it just becomes more manageable. Dr. Amy?
Yeah, I love those ideas. And then as far as instituting some good habits to take care of yourself, one of the best things you can do is just start with one and decide that you're going to put a little focus on one habit change. We know that when people have success in one area, it spills over into everything. So I'll talk from my own experience on the exercise one. For years I thought I knew I needed to exercise. I knew how important it was, and I wasn't doing it. And I finally woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm never going to have time to exercise, because that was always my excuse. I'm never going to have time. And I thought, so I better do it now. And what I have found is blocking that time off, other things have just fallen away around it. And I say that to you from, a very busy life, that what it has meant sometimes is I've had to give something else up, or to say I'm not going to deal with this, or I'm going to walk away from the work for an hour, or, whatever it is. And as a caregiver, it may be making sure you get somebody in there. But I can tell you that the benefits of self-care are well worth it. And to say I can't do good self-care because I'm so busy, you have to make it happen. And if you don't know how to do it in your life, and if your client doesn't know how to do it, you have to sit down and say, what could we start with? Is it better eating? Is it taking 20 minutes to meditate once a day? Is it the exercise? Start with one healthy habit and add on and add on and add on. Some of the latest research shows that people who caregive for long periods of time have shortened life expectancies because they aren't taking care of themselves. So we have to see this as such a priority that we figure out ways to do that. And, most of us have pockets of time in our day that are not spent in ways that are the most helpful, whether it is sitting in front of the TV or doing something that it may be that we're getting some enjoyment out of it, but that it's not maximizing what we could do. And I think it's, again, one health habit at a time, and recognizing that you're not going to be perfect, but that you can, it's getting back on the horse every time you get off and saying, okay, I know I got to do this. And I think caregivers really sometimes need support from other people in putting those plans together. So if you do, don't be embarrassed about that. And as those of you who are professionals need to really say, do you need some help in this? Because most of us need some accountability and support when it comes to making good health changes.
Okay, speaking about taking that time and making those changes, the next question kind of dovetails into that. The question is, how do I as a caregiver take that time for myself without feeling guilty?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that there is a certain amount of guilt that you'll have, and I think you have to really think about, if I do this for myself, I'm going to be better suited to help take care of my mom. If I give myself an hour or a day to do what I need to do or what I want to do, I think the important part is, and I learned this early on as a family caregiver, that it was my responsibility to make sure I cared about my parents, but I didn't have to do all of the care for them. And once I realized that, I was able to take a little time for myself, because when I spent time with my parents, it was really quality time, and I was really happy to be there and happy to help them. And so it was a kind of a mind shift for me. Dr. Amy?
Yeah, I like to think again about there's a couple things I talk to people about not being a perfect caregiver, but being a good enough caregiver, because what happens is there's always more you can do, so it becomes a trap. So I say, is the person you're caring for first and foremost safe? Do they have basic needs met? And do they have some good quality of life issues met? But there's always more you can do. And so if you fall into that trap, you get into trouble. So is this good enough? Are they doing well? And then the next question I ask is, how you're living sustainable? Can you do it for the long haul? And if the answer is no, then you've got to make some changes and take a break. And a lot of us struggle with this guilt, and that's where support groups are great, friends are great, because we can't always see it for ourselves, and it's, I should be doing more. And you may be caring for someone who's pushing you to do more. And so you have the pressure both internally and from outside of yourself. So I think talking to someone who's outside the situation, who can help you assess, is this enough that you're doing, and can help you say, you need to go take a break for you. We know that, again, you don't expect your cell phone to work without plugging it back in. When the battery would run down, you wouldn't be surprised. I don't know why we have grown to think that we should just be able to push ourselves endlessly without recharging. And I think we need people in our lives who will support that. So if you don't have someone who's supporting that, that's where you can get that from a support group. And it doesn't mean that you may not feel some guilt occasionally, but the wonderful thing is you can feel guilt and still take the break. So it's okay to do that. But again, safety number one.
Okay, next is more of a suggestion, not really a question. We do like to pass those on from our attendees. And the suggestion is encouraging clients to utilize Skype as well as remote monitoring services has been very helpful in enabling them to take a more active role in providing moral support and FaceTime with an older family member. So please keep that in mind.
And Steve, can I just say one thing about that? I was with colleagues and friends for a couple of days who are Australian, and she has parents who are quite elderly over in Australia, and we were in Florida together, and she talks to them on Skype morning and night. And I thought that was so fabulous that here she is, that far away, different time zones. So it is a great suggestion. She said, she starts and ends her day, which is the opposite for them, with those phone calls. So it can be a great way to see the person, to feel connected, and to have the ability to talk for either free or very little money.
Okay, we got time for one last quick question here. It sounds as if a lot of these suggestions can also be used for clients who are grandparents taking care of grandchildren. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, absolutely. Or, a lot of these suggestions are great for any caregiving situation, people who are parenting young children, but, grandparents caring for grandchildren. And they're really just good suggestions for all of us to consider. It just, when you add caregiving into the mix, obviously things get even more out of balance in many people's lives. So I think they're practical suggestions for just having good work-life balance.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time for today's web seminar, but I want to thank our presenter, Dr. Amy Dupree, for another great presentation, as well as Mary Alexander for joining in for the Q&A portion. Thank you to you both.
You're welcome, Steve.